Hey guys, welcome back! Wanna see in what extent I've upgraded my homemade arcade? Let's take a look. Yeah, I know, this Nvidia card is a bit overkill for this build, but why not? So let's go back and recall the latest upgrade I did for this particular build from a couple years ago on episode 132. I went from a low-end configuration to a slightly improved one, but launchbox, the front end I use nowadays, is getting better, bigger and more demanding that I felt the need to find solutions at a hardware level. Don't get me wrong, launchbox is not solely responsible for this upgrade. The quantity of emulators I use, the huge number of ROMs scattered all around the hard drive, images, sounds, videos, etc, all that combined really demands more speed and processing power, and the ideal was to host all that on an SSD. For now I'm gonna upgrade to an SSD, but solely for the OS. It's a 120GB SSD that I had laying around, and for the front end and related stuff I'm gonna stick with my good old 1TB mechanical hard drive. There's also a 250GB hard disk installed that I use just for backup of important and retro related stuff that really makes sense to be part of this build. Besides the SSD and the Nvidia card, now a 4GB Asus Strix GTX 960, I fitted also 4GB of RAM and an Intel Core 2 Quad, and I immediately noticed the differences, not only in the boot process, but also in the system's own general performance. But I'm not gonna pester you with benchmarks and all that boring stuff. Let's play some games! So here's a few recommendations that you might wanna revisit during this stay safe, stay home and play games period we're facing on real hardware or using a similar solution like the one I'm showcasing. Let's start with Bust a Move or Puzzle Bobble on the 3DO, a classic among classics. And it can't get more classic than this. Honestly, it's hard to classify a classic at this point. Everyone has their own definition of classic and have their own favorite titles that falls under that category. But let's face it, this one is perfect for all family. Everyone will be able to pick and play straight away. And it doesn't really matter the version you play, every single port and conversion of Bust a Move or Puzzle Bobble is freaking awesome and highly addictive. Batman is an arcade-exclusive game developed by New Mega and released by Atari back in 1992. It is quite comparable to Batman the movie, developed and published back in '89 by Ocean Software for 8 and 16-bit home computers, a game that is among my favorites of all time. And it really seems like both New Mega and Ocean shared ideas for their own and personal adaptation of the 1989 movie directed by Tim Burton. Both have the same gameplay elements, and I truly believe that this arcade exclusive really drank tons of inspiration on that 8 and 16-bit marvel. Prices of TurboGrafx games are totally out of my reach, so this is the perfect way to play them all and using my favorite controller. As I've told so many times before, the arcade experience was huge for me, so I'm more comfortable to play 8 and 16-bit games with this particular control scheme. Victory Run is an obvious choice for me. It was released in Japan in 1987 and a couple years later in the US, and it's hard to believe how a Deckard-inspired game never had a European release, a region of the globe that lives and breathes the sport. But I'm aware that Victory Run would scare some players, cause in this one we're forced to use manual shifting all the way from Paris to Dakar. One of my favorite games on the system. Now and as for Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, played a ton on my PC back when it was originally released in 1999. The one I'm playing here is the Nintendo 64 port that was released practically alongside the Windows original version, and as you can see, it's pretty fast also. It grabs the one and probably most exciting part of the film and transforms it into this frenetic pod racing game that takes place in Tatooine and on various other planets of the Star Wars universe. Incredibly enough, this game holds the Guinness record as the best-selling sci-fi racing game, beating series like Wipeout and F-Zero. Can you believe it? I simply needed to have also the Scum VM emulator installed to play all my favorite point-and-click graphic adventures from back in the day, and Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis is always my first pick. And what else can I say that I haven't said before? Just watch my history and origins video related to this incredible game, and you'll certainly discover a few more curious facts that were hidden behind its development. And I truly wish that Steven Spielberg would transform Fate of Atlantis into a full-length feature film. That would be freaking incredible.
That's it. All that smart stuff seems so easy when I'm listening to her. Say, you're okay for a college boy. Come on in.
Marble Madness is so awesome in every platform to where it was ported and converted, and the Sega Game Gear version is no exception. Well, thinking of it, the ZX Spectrum version is not that great, but the Amiga one is really incredible. As for this Game Gear venture, it's highly addictive as well, just like the original arcade game was back in the day. Another great game to play in turns, overcoming an obstacle over the other, and with an awesome soundtrack playing in the background. So good! And what about the magnificent Midnight Resistance? What a work of art! From level design and gameplay up to its incredible soundtrack, at least for me. Played at time the arcade original from Data East and later the ZX Spectrum and Amiga conversions by Special Effects and published by Ocean Software. This is the Mega Drive Genesis version that was never released in Europe. Only managed to play it in late 90s on my PC with the help of an emulator. And I was blown away! It's simply the best home version of the game, no questions asked. And another of my favorite games of all time. I probably should start working on a video about my favorite games ever released, since the early days up to the current gen. Another classic among the classics is Metal Slug 2, the original one developed by SNK for the Neo Geo MVS system that swallowed so many coins and continued the fight against General Morden that has now formed an alliance with aliens. Yeah, that's right! The over-the-top action and incredible and extremely loud sound engine will grab us by the nuts and inject a huge dose of adrenaline to keep on moving and never stop till all these foes are dead and buried. Back in 1998, in a time when 3D gaming was moving forward, run-and-gun 2D platformers were still showing all its greatness and gaining followers, just like bees returning to their hives, if it makes sense. And to conclude, another of my favorite Indiana Jones games, The Greatest Adventures, released exclusively for the Super Nintendo back in 1994 and developed by one of my favorite studios from back in the day, Factor 5. It really shows the influence of Super Star Wars also on the SNES, and it brings together all three movies from Indy's original trilogy, a trilogy that I absolutely adore. A curious fact was that this game also had a complete and ready-to-be-released port for the Mega Drive Genesis that ended up scrapped and stored in a warehouse somewhere, just like the Ark of the Covenant. It was even reviewed and praised on a couple of video game magazines. How I would love to get my hands on the Mega Drive or Genesis ROM. So guys, here you have it, a list of awesome games that you should revisit or even play for the first time. I'm sure that you will recall great moments spent with these back in their respective golden eras, and obviously a ton other of your personal favorite titles both on these specific platforms or on the ones that you prioritize, using emulation or real hardware. The goal is to have fun, as simple as that, and I always have a blast every time I get my hands on my homemade arcade build. Tell me down in the comments section below the games you're playing right now, and if you've enjoyed this episode, you know the drill! So thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you all in my next episode. Take care and stay safe. Cheers!